Thank you, Bhavik. Hi, everybody. My name is Usman Shakeel, and I am a Principal Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services. The topic of my talk today, as Bhavik mentioned, securing media content and applications on the cloud. So as a solutions architect, many of you have worked with the customers to provide best practices around building architectures on AWS, how you can best utilize AWS services from a cost perspective, security perspective, scalability perspective, and all the nice benefits that the cloud brings to the table. So that said, a lot of my customers ask the question, does AWS really meet my security requirements? And more on the media vertical side, can I have my media content and applications running on AWS and aligned to the MPAA best practices? So the answer to both these questions is yes, it can. And it's really, if you look at the evolution, where we started, where we are, the number of the feature sets, the security controls that are built in these different services, it's really not a question of what workflows or what applications or what type of content can I or can I not put on the cloud. It's more about how and when, how can I get started and move this stuff over to the cloud and use the great benefits that the cloud promises. So perhaps a better question to ask is, what can we do together, you as a customer and AWS, to ensure that your applications and content that's on the cloud is secure? So Amazon Web Services, as my fellow presenters earlier mentioned, we provide highly scalable, durable infrastructure services that are available via web services. So security is really at the forefront of all these services, or priority number one. So Amazon, on the whole, is we take the security and privacy of our customers' data very, very seriously. And it's the same platform that you see that we have so many different companies, large, small, so many different industry verticals, pharma companies, healthcare, finance, media, entertainment, gaming, mobile, many different use cases, all running on the same platform. So from an Amazon perspective, it's the same platform that we provide the same level of security for. If it's a government workload that's running on us, if it's a finance workload that's running on us, or if it's Hollywood's most valuable assets that are being put on us. So security is at the paramount. So on the media infrastructure side, the media infrastructure providers, or the IT, they're under constant stress. They need to provide core differentiators to their customers, to their internal customers, to provide better services, better feature set, to provide shorter time to market, more cool features, reach more and more audience, reach more and more devices, more analytics, more monetization, and more monetization capabilities, as Mark pointed out earlier. But at the same time, they're under constant pressure from their business units because there are budget constraints, there are time constraints, that they want better vendor relationships, they want shorten the procurement cycle. There is the thing about audits and compliances. I want to make sure that all my infrastructure is being managed, and not just managed, but also efficient, secure, and I'm providing enough disaster recovery, high availability type of things. So it's really, it's really up to you, up to the media IT. How do you want to use that dollar? Do you want to use it for undifferentiated heavy lifting, managing your infrastructure, managing the security around that infrastructure, or would you rather focus on providing better service to your internal customers so that they can go and develop better feature set, they can provide better customer experience, and at the end of the day, have a much happy customer base. So let's talk about AWS and how AWS security model can help the media IT in this case. So security works as a shared responsibility model within AWS. So on the AWS side, we are responsible for securing and managing all the physical aspects of your, that be the data center itself, the facilities, the physical security of those facilities, the physical infrastructure itself, the network infrastructure, all the way up to the virtualization or the hypervisor infrastructure layer. Everything that goes under that in terms of security is AWS's responsibility. So what that means is that the only thing that's left up to the customer to take care of is really the OS level or the guest operating system level security or the application level security. So you can really leave all that physical infrastructure level security on AWS and focus rather on making your applications really secure. So on AWS side, since we provide security of the physical infrastructure, the facilities, the physical security of the facilities, the physical infrastructure, network infrastructure, and virtualization layer, we go through rigorous audits on an ongoing basis. And we have compliances and audits done from SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, ISO 27001, PCI DSS Level 1 compliant, FedRAMP, FISMA, AWS GovCloud, and MPAA Best Practices alignment. And we have hundreds and thousands of customers that are running different security compliant applications from SOX compliant, HIPAA compliant, FISMA, US federal government, DICAP, and actually MPAA aligned or compliant applications on us as and a prime example, the Sony MCS-C has been mentioned in the morning. So one of the core benefits, of running your applications on a platform like AWS is that, as I mentioned earlier, that we have so many different types of customers, large, small, different workloads, different industry verticals, and really that means different security requirements. So you have NASDAQ coming to us, Shell coming to us, Netflix coming to us with all their stringent security requirements that are sort of specific to them. And we work very closely with our customers to constantly innovate and come up with this new feature set or new security controls that we really build as a part of the platform. And the result is that all our users that are using that platform can really leverage those security controls. And that's the real key here. So earlier, my fellow presenters, they mentioned or talked about different AWS services, and I won't really dig deep into what each one of these services are, but kind of wanted to give you a mapping for looking at the media workflow from ingest to store to process to deliver. What are the different AWS services that are at play? And how do the security controls of these services really map to enable you to build MPA-aligned applications on the AWS cloud? So starting at the ingest piece, we have the Amazon EC2, the Elastic Compute Cloud that allows you to build virtual instances. Storage Gateway, John Downey talked about Storage Gateway in depth this morning, great service. Elastic Load Balancer, basically a virtual load balancer, allows you to load balance your traffic. Import-export service, again, John talked about it in depth. AWS Direct Connect, which allows you to peer with us over a 1 gigi or a 10 gigi cross connect via the co-location facilities. The Amazon Machine Images. On the storage side, we talked about Amazon's S3 service, the Amazon Elastic Block Store, and the Amazon Glacier as the archival service. On the processing side, we again, David talked about the Amazon Elastic Transcoder, the Amazon EC2, Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, the relational database service, NoSQL, DynamoDB, Amazon Redshift, Elastic Cache, Elastic MapReduce, which is the Hadoop in the cloud, and other platform level services that John will talk about later, from cloud search to simple notification service, simple workflow, et cetera. So it's not just the bare bones infrastructure building blocks. You see that we have these platform level services as well that allow you to really build this middle layer in between for orchestration of your applications. And then finally, on the delivery side, we have CloudFront, our CDN, and Route 53, our DNS service. And we'll talk about next, how the security controls from some of these services can enable you to get to that goal of really securing your applications. So MPAA security best practices. AWS alignment to MPAA security best practices was reviewed back in October 2012, and Mark talked about it. And I'll really focus on what was done. So really what we did was we took the existing AWS SOC 1, SOC 2, and ISO 27001 audits, and we took the MPA best practices that are available out there, and we took the audit reports and mapped or merged them with the MPA best practices. And what we found was that at the infrastructure layer, that within these services that I talked about, that there is a complete one-to-one mapping, that we are already taking care or doing all these best practices that are mentioned by MPA in that best practices. And this is all based on the shared responsibility model, where AWS is taking full responsibility of the physical infrastructure itself all the way up to the virtualization layer, and the customer only needs to focus on the application layer. And that means taking care of a big portion of the burden at the end of the day from the media, IT, or infrastructure side. On the MPA best practices alignment, the different AWS services that were in scope are mentioned here. And by the way, these are most all our services that are relevant to the media workflows. So you could be using basically any of these services and have your applications easily pass the MPA alignment. The MPA alignment best practices for the content types. So for the content types, it's all the way starting from pre-production to production, production wrap, post-production, and to distribution. So really, you could have any type of application within this media workflow that could be different use case or different type, whatever, depending on what you want to do, where you can have, say, just barely storing some scripts or storyboards, to building some content management system, to a pretty complicated metadata layer, doing some content searching, transcoding, archival, all the way up to delivery. And that's all in scope with the MPA best practices alignment. So again, the key is that you focus on the application that you're trying to build and let AWS take care of the physical infrastructure security pieces for you. So let's do a little deep dive into what is MPAA best practices. So this is actually a screenshot from the MPA best practices website here. And as you can see here, they've subdivided these best practices into three major areas. So one is the management systems, the physical security, and then finally the digital security. So at a high level, the management systems include the organization management, the competency, of how you're running these things. Then there's the physical security, which is actually the facility, physical security, the asset management, transport, and the infrastructure itself, and the digital security, which is around the virtual assets. So taking these MPAA best practices, high level, and mapping those now into the shared responsibility model, and all of a sudden you see that all the physical infrastructure security controls that are required from the MPAA best practices perspective are already taken care of from AWS side. And you could be rest assured that it's when it comes time for an audit for an MPAA alignment of your application, you don't have to really worry about these things, because AWS has already done the due diligence and gone through this alignment. On the physical security side, the management system side, that includes the infrastructure, physical security, and the digital security that corresponds to the physical infrastructure again. And what's left for you is really, again, as I said, it's almost feels like repeating myself, but it's really what's left for you is focus on the application itself. How can you make your application secure on the management system side or digital security side? And AWS provides you these controls to really get to that point. So if you're really interested in knowing more about what different physical controls that AWS has on the infrastructure security side, I'd highly recommend you to go to the AWS Security Center. It's a very rich website, talks about the different AWS security controls on the physical side of things. There are nice white papers on the AWS security controls and AWS compliance and risk. And also, it's full of information in terms of security best practices, et cetera. So highly recommend you go check it out. So what I would like to focus on today is back to the shared responsibility model. If we keep the AWS responsibility on the side and focus on what as a customer you're responsible for, what are the controls you're going to need, and what are the controls that AWS provides you to get to this point of having your application MPAA aligned. So let's start with the basic AWS controls. AWS, Amazon Web Services, all these infrastructure services or platform services, database services, network, etc., all of these services are available to you via a web services interface. So for those web services, all these web services interface, we provide you SSL endpoints. So you can access all these services that we've been talking about since the morning around ingest, your processing, storage, accessible via SSL. Amazon Virtual Private Cloud gives you the capability to have VPN access as well to your resources, and we'll talk about it in more detail in the upcoming slides. And for all these endpoints, there's actually redundant connection to more than one communication service at each internet-facing edge, so that you have highly available endpoints when it comes to automating your systems. All these API requests that are being sent out, you actually are available via SOAP or query-based and must be used via X509 certs or RSA public key. And SSH to EC2 instances also require a private public key pair or RDP certificate in the case of RDP access, and we'll talk about more what that actually means when it comes to EC2 instances. AWS also provides you multi-factor authentication capabilities and key management and rotation. And one thing that I like to point out here is that, I stand here talk about all these different controls that AWS provides you, but it's also important to note is that with these controls, the real focus or the real vision is that these controls are built such that you use these security best practices from the get-go, that they become a default from the beginning. So when it comes time, again, to really auditing your application, you've already used these best practices, and it becomes a very easy solution. So, and the other key thing there is that these controls that AWS is providing you are very similar to the controls that your IT groups are, say, familiar in terms of using today in their own prem data centers. One of these services of that kind is like Identity and Access Management Service, where we're giving you the capability to create users, groups, and then create permissions based on those groups as to who can access what type of content, what type of resources on your environment. And it's very similar to, say, if you have an Active Directory or LDAP or something, some sort of identification authentication service running, and we provide federated authentication to your existing identity store, so it becomes a seamless transition, or even if you're trying to do, say, like a hybrid type of an environment. There is deep integration for identity and access management with other AWS services like S3, and we'll talk about what S3 controls are there, CloudFront, EC2, SimpleDB, RDS, etc. So let's talk quickly about EC2 Security Controls. So as I mentioned earlier, shared responsibility model, there is the physical security all the way up to the virtualization layer that AWS is taking responsibility for. So where you come into play is the guest operating system, or the operating system that runs on top of the slot where that virtual instance is running. That could be any flavor of operating system that you choose, any Linux or Windows, etc. The key is that it's 100% completely controlled by you. You have the admin or root access to it. Nothing different than having, say, a physical server running in your data center. Just like that, you have access to this instance, virtual instance that is running on AWS. Only difference is it's virtual. You generate the key pairs, so meaning that only you can log in to that system or give access to others to that system or virtual instance running. And AWS has no visibility into it. So your content, however you choose to store it there, it's yours. You can choose any sort of encryption techniques there as well to add an additional level of security if you like. One key feature for EC2 is the security groups. So what a security group is sort of analogous to your physical firewall, say for example, except that it is specific to each instance that you create. Going back to that point that I mentioned earlier, that using an environment like AWS really force you to these best practices or to use these best practices from the get-go. One key example there is security groups. So anytime you launch or create a new server or instance in the AWS cloud, it requires you to have a firewall associated to it. And that firewall, by the way, is default deny all. So until you explicitly give access to somebody to have access to that server, nobody can really come in and access that server. So moving on to the virtual private cloud, this is a feature set within AWS that gives you the capability to build a completely isolated environment. And by completely isolated environment, meaning it is almost as an extension of your existing footprint or existing data center. You get to choose the CIDR blocks of the CIDR ranges. You get to choose both the ingress and egress filters, the stateful filters, as well as the stateless network access control list. Very similar to the methodology that you have in your own data center. And you also get to choose the routing rules. So meaning you choose what or who can access that particular environment that you have set up in AWS. And the only way to get access to it is over a VPN IPsec tunnel or a dedicated line via a direct connect. So S3 security controls. First of all, S3, anytime you create an object in S3, only the creator of the object has access to the bucket or the object. So it is owner access only by default. So until you give explicit permission for somebody to access that piece of content, nobody but you have the access to that content. We support signed URLs, a query string authentication. IAM, as I mentioned, Identity Access Management Service, integrates very nicely with S3. You can create policies that are bucket level policies, object level policies, give permissions to different users, groups, based on their role as to what content they can access or what kind of functions they can perform on your content library if you happen to have it on S3. You can also enable versioning or accidental deletion using MFA delete. And then finally, you can enable detailed access logging and know who is actually accessing your buckets. Let's move on to the delivery piece of things. So using CloudFront, our CDN service, you can deliver the content. So CloudFront has some key security features or controls built in as well. So by default, what is CloudFront? It's really an HTTP edge cache that allows you to serve the content to your users by being close to them. So you can choose within CloudFront the private content feature, which delivers content only to securely signed requests. That's a default feature in there. You just enable it and you have it. You can enable HTTPS access only, so no HTTP, all the requests will be over SSL. You can also select the CloudFront origin access identity, meaning your content is only accessible via CloudFront. So if you have any authentication authorization mechanism in place that happens to be in place, nobody can go directly to the source and have access to the content. You can also enable the signed URL verification that could be based on basically timed URL or a CIDR block of the requestor. And you can enable HTTPS access from the origin fetches as well. And then lastly, the access logs capability, which again give you the complete logging as to who is accessing your content at what time. A final word on the content location. So earlier, my colleagues mentioned that AWS is available in 9 different regions, and but one point that I like to mention here is that these regions are really independent entities. Anytime you're creating any content, putting any content in there, you're creating any resources there, the first thing you do is a region. That which region you want to put this content in, which region you want to create this resource in, that resource being an S3 bucket, an EC2 instance, EBS volume, whatever have you. But the content and that AWS resource that you created always lives in that region for the life of it. Under no circumstances, AWS moves this content or resources around these regions unless explicitly started or done by the customer itself. So great. I mean, you created an environment in, say, one of our regions, US East, and that lives in that region. How do you get high availability? How do you get, durability like S3 provides? So that's where the concept of availability zones comes in. And John mentioned early in the morning and talked about it in more depth. But the idea is that within each region, we have these physically separated data centers that are connected over low latency fiber. So giving you this capability to have your applications while living within the same region give you that high availability characteristics and same durability characteristics that S3 gives you out of the box. So finally, what does that mean? What's the path to MPAA best practice alignment then? So as I mentioned, the physical infrastructure security layer all taken care of by AWS. You focus on your applications, your network configuration controls via security groups, VPC routing, your operating system, your application itself. You get a third-party auditor, and along with using the AWS security controls of the physical infrastructure itself, you get the MPAA best practices alignment. But the key here is that a lot of heavy lifting for the physical infrastructure security itself is already taken care of. So just focus on the application. So just a few final thoughts here. Get the clicker moving. All right. So I talked about in depth, the different security controls that AWS provides you, the shared responsibility model, and the key takeaways are that it's really the best practices approach that comes with default of using a system like AWS. That by default, you're using these best practices. By default, you have the AWS identity and access management. You have agile trust group zones like security groups and VPC and standardized environments. And these controls are very, very similar to what you're used to using today. But again, even with that, you're not alone in your journey to the MPA alignment or any other security requirements that you have. We're here with you. We have a team of AWS Solutions Architects. We have a team of great AWS professional services, AWS Premium support, our Trusted Advisor service, which is a great feature within the AWS Web Console. Gives you automated notifications, alerts if you have any security issues that we think may be possible, or even how you can save on cost and things like that. And then finally, a growing partner network. That's a great value add. So please come talk to us. Talk to your sales team, contact your sales team. The Help and Support Center is there to help you. Look at the AWS Compliances website and the Security Center website. Very rich websites filled with white papers and great architectural principles, et cetera. And then finally, come see us at re:Invent. Great event there. Last year, I had a lot of fun, a lot of great information there, and my customers always tell me great thing about it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys coming in, spending the time here, and I'll move it on to Bhavik.
Thank you. Thank you, Usman.